Welcome to Panel 1, Creating an Inclusive Society. I'm Fernando, a professor from University of Wollongong in Australia. Let us pay our respects to country. I would like to acknowledge the Dharma people, the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, traditions, and culture of Aboriginal Australia. I also ask that we remember that this land is, was, and always will be traditional Aboriginal land. Thank you. Welcome again. We have watched 4 excellent views from thinkers and practitioners on the topic of creating an inclusive society. Professor Dr. B. Scherer, Dr. Linus, Lancaster, Leanne Smith, and Venerable Miao Guang. They have all shared different takes on this very important topic of creating an inclusive society. While Professor B. Scherer shared a theoretical perspective, if I may, of this topic from engaging the scriptures in particular, Dr. Linus Lancaster brought us a very practical project about bringing the monsters that we have out into the open and making friends with them. And then we watched Leanne Smith perhaps taking us to a broader, more societal level in talking about how we can respond to this challenge of engaging youth in creating an inclusive society. And lastly, we watched Venerable Miao Guang taking us through how the COVID pandemic had actually shaped us, influenced us, and also reshaped and perhaps even re-emphasized what we stand for in humanity. So this panel discussion will include your question and answers for our esteemed panelists, and I will endeavor to include all your questions in full during this 1 hour we have. In regard to your questions, you can leave your questions in the chat box. A special request to keep your questions direct and simple so that our team can extract them and post them to the moderator's panel for me to post it to our panelists. You are welcome to post questions straight away, and we will be taking them as we go through our discussion. If you have any comments, please save them for the symposium survey, which will be shared at the end of the session. After the discussion, just to inform you that we will have a group photo like in the keynote session. So there will be a request for you to open your video cameras if it is safe and if you are comfortable to do so for a group photo. Lastly, in this session, there will be a survey link that will appear in your chat box for you to complete about the details of and your response and feedback to this session. Thank you. Right. I would like to start off by asking a very simple question from all four panelists. What is meant by an inclusive society? So if I can direct this question first to B, if you don't mind. Thank you, B.
Thank you. And thank you for the kind words. I'm so honored to be in this midst, and I want to thank the organizers. It's lovely to be here. What is an inclusive society? I think on a very simple level, for me, an inclusive society is where we can feel as individuals that we are same, only different. What I call variable, that we can really feel welcome in the sameness and the difference that we bring. So sometimes I tell my students that Buddhism is just about one thing, to be kind. For me, the easiest way to describe the Bodhisattva vow is promise to be kind. So when we are kind, when we are open our hearts, then we can accept and embrace and celebrate our sameness and our difference. And I come from experience where in society, this sameness yet difference, only difference, has led to physical and mental pain by not having open hearts and not encountering open hearts by Buddhists and non-Buddhists. And in our little groups of Dharma freaks that sometimes I do these retreats for Dharma freaks. This is the common experience of being othered and feeling this pain of being othered, not having your sameness included with an open heart. Thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you very much, B. Can I move over to Linus, please?
I mean, it's a huge question, and it's hard to know what such a society really would look like, because in our situation now, it feels very hypothetical, unfortunately. But I think that an inclusive society is one that makes every attempt to be centered on compassion, and that it is one where there is a culture of listening, which is sometimes a rare commodity. And from an artistic perspective, which tends to be the lens through which I look at the world, it's also one where people have the freedom and mutual respect among each other to pursue their own creativity and to pursue their own sense of becoming as beings to the greatest degree possible on their own terms, while also understanding that we live in a collective society that must accommodate a lot of different viewpoints and so forth, but that there would be a greater degree of freedom than we do have, and also a greater degree of respect and a sense of obligation to each other.
Thank you, Linus. Thank you very much for that. Venerable Miao Guang, if you don't mind to answer this question, what is meant by an inclusive society?
Okay, thank you, Mario, and hello, everyone, dear Bodhisattvas. Well, my answer would be somehow similar, but take a slightly different way of wording from Professor Scherer's answer. An inclusive society, from my understanding, could be an idea that was already proposed by Prince Siddhartha when he was born, when he took the miraculous 7 steps and said that I am the uniquely honored one in this world. And so my understanding of that statement is actually not something that is exclusive to him. In a way, we are all in Prince Siddhartha's position. So an inclusive society will be when we realize that each and every one of us are all uniquely different in the same way. That is to say, we each are born with our own conditions, causes and conditions. However, it must be realized that we are all in the same boat. We're traveling down the life of the river of life in the same way, while at the same time we can each remain a unique characteristic. But this boat must be carried across the water with the spirits of empathy, as well as interconnectedness. Well, first of all, by empathy, it means that being on the same boat, we have to realize that we cannot just share in the joy and the happiness. When this boat is taking us through suffering, nobody can try to escape it or get away with it or push it onto the shoulder of other people. It's important for us to feel that we are all suffering together in order for us to find a way out together. That's the first thing. And secondly, by interconnectedness on this boat, it means that we are all in one way or the other connected to one another, right? Through human relations, through biology, through science, or through the simple rules of existence. And so in the past 2 years, COVID-19 has pretty much called upon us to realize that, so that we will start to take a different perspective and stop thinking that I am suffering. But no, it's more like we are suffering. So this inclusive society gives me the image of that boat, right? We need to embrace each other's uniqueness without forgetting that we are still on the same boat.
Thank you very much, Venerable Miao Guang. That was so insightful. And I could see Professor B. Scherer nodding his head away all the way. And can I, in response to your feedback and answer, can I invite Professor B. Scherer to kind of share, what you kind of felt when Venerable Miao Guang was giving that response especially about, retaining our uniqueness, but still traveling together.
Thank you so much. I think these two aspects are so important, the interconnectedness and traveling together. I feel we are talking too soon always about an individualized view of the causes and conditions. And we need to be very, very clear that from the ego view, there is no individualized connection to cause conditions. So we cannot use karma theory to bash people or to make them feel less valued in their difference. And also ultimately understanding that interconnectedness means is also that nobody is really better than others. If somebody of us is suffering, we are all suffering. And if one of us is contributing to the suffering of others, then the whole system is effective. We are all effective. The boat will leak, so to speak. So, and I think this is really important to remember. We need to stay away from individual karma bashing and instead celebrate our unique opportunities as well as our interconnectedness and what they bring to this boat in which we are all traveling.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor B. Scherer. I would like to, before we conclude this line of questioning, I would like to finally invite Dr. Linus Lancaster to comment on suffering. Professor B. Scherer just mentioned that, well, suffering has a kind of a central role here, and it's a key part. in understanding what is to be inclusive. So in your project, how did you actually kind of engage, or how did you actually deal with the suffering that was obviously part and parcel of that, you know, what the students were doing with those creations?
At the outset, of course, our thinking was focused almost entirely on those students who we knew were coming out of extremely difficult circumstances. But as the project progressed and we began to read the student testimonials and we began to see how the students were expressing, you know, their inner turmoil in written work, there were, you know, many surprises along the way, but one of them being that every one of our students expressed that there were difficulties in their lives. And of course, they're teenagers. It's a difficult time of life, and it's not surprising that everybody would have something to deal with, but that they were so much more extensive. And what we heard from the students from whom it would be unexpected, the scholar athlete, the student from a wealthy, privileged family, the high performing student with a 4.5 GPA and seemingly not a care in the world, that those were some of the rawest stories that we heard, that where the student was not suffering outwardly, but carrying a tremendous amount of anger, resentment, and the money, the appearance of privilege, was overlaying a lot of difficulty. And what we found was that in some cases that mental struggles don't discriminate, that they don't. Of course, they're exacerbated by financial difficulty and abusive situations at home and so forth, but they exist across the spectrum. And so that was one of the surprises, is that it was more universal than we expected. And in terms of how we began to embrace it as we saw it, it was completely non-judgmental. There wasn't a great deal of back and forth interaction between us and some of the students. And that's how we set it up on purpose, because we wanted to give them as much freedom to open up to us as possible. And we found that the most effective way to do that was not to try to get them to talk to us directly, but that they could safely write it in an anonymous way on paper. And that allowed them to come forward to us with a lot of information that we know they would never share with their friends, that they probably hadn't shared with any other adults in their lives. And so there was a lot of indirect communication that was happening, or asynchronous communication that was happening. And that, I think, is what allowed the project to be as successful as it was, in terms of giving these students the safe space that they needed to open up about this stuff. But it didn't lead in turn to us going and hugging them and saying, oh my gosh, what you're going through. We didn't, we let it remain, more anonymous than that, except in a couple of cases where we heard something that was so alarming that we had to report it. And we have run this project for 2 years. The first year, we heard some very, very troubling things and some distressing stuff, but there weren't any red flags. Whereas under COVID, there were several cases that I had to report to the school because the students were talking about suicidal ideation and things like that. And so that was a difference from the previous year to this one.
Thank you for sharing, Linus. Thank you very much. Leanne, you're back. Nice to see you. Can I direct that question to you again about your understanding of what is an inclusive society?
Thank you, Mario. What I was trying to say earlier was that, and I agree with all the other panelists in what they said, but for me, when we talk about an inclusive society, it really goes to the heart of what society means. And of course, that's how we coexist with others in a community, if you like, at scale. So for me, an inclusive society is really just a well-functioning one, or I think something that we are missing a lot these days is a confident society, because when a society feels connected and confident, then the generosity of spirit can come out in terms of even thinking about inclusivity, because in an ideal world, we wouldn't think about inclusivity as a concept. It should be a fundamental part of our society. So for me, it's really where a society sees shared individual value of every person in it, as well as inherent common values that represent how they engage with each other. So for me, coming from a human rights background, that's a lot about respect and recognizing every individual's dignity. It's also obviously in healthier societies or more confident, inclusive ones, you see a celebration of diversity, you see room for different perspectives as well as different experiences. And at the pointy end, an inclusive society, I suppose, means that nobody is marginalized for the ways in which they are different, as opposed to the things that keep them as part of that society. So thank you for coming back to me on that.
No worries, Leanne. Thank you so much. Yes. I think the questions in the chat box are coming in, and I would like to take the question. I think that I can direct to Leanne. Now, the question is about human rights and freedom. Following from this morning keynote dialogue speakers, may I please ask, is there a conflict between shared humanity and the individual human rights or freedom? On what basis is democracy formed? Leanne, if you can please have your...
I'd be glad to take a shot at that. There are two. It's a very good question, and there are two distinct parts in there, for at least from the way I perceive it. I think, as you said from the keynote, and in the context of COVID-19, this issue of individual rights and shared society is really become a very pointed one. And for me as a human rights lawyer, it's one I've struggled with, working in lots of different countries where there are tensions between individual rights and collective rights. And that's an inherent part of the struggle for human rights. It's exactly about that. It's about working out that balance of individual versus collective rights, or group rights against group rights, in a way that allows us to have an effective society. So it's never a simple answer, but I have dear friends who have come to me in the context of COVID-19 and said to me, but Leanne, you're a human rights lawyer. Don't you think my rights are being violated by requiring me to be vaccinated, or by being marginalized in my society because I choose not to be vaccinated? And although it's a very personal thing, the international human rights law gives you a framework for assessing those comparative rights and responsibilities in a way that should allow for some cohesion in the society and the overall health of the society, while respecting the rights of the individual within it. But it's by no means an easy balancing act. And as every new situation presents and every new set of rights comes into a conflict, it has to be revisited and reworked. So I hope that goes some way to answering that question. In terms of democracy, I think you can think about the different kinds of democracy around the world and which of those are better at balancing human rights. But when you're talking about, of course, in a lot of democracies, the overwhelming power of the majority and how that impacts on marginalized groups or people at the margin, then that's where, for me personally, the idea of social democracy is a very important one, where your democracy is built on being inclusive and making sure that no one is left behind. So a democracy where there is an acceptance of a social safety net, an economic, social, cultural safety net that keeps the society as cohesive as possible.
Thank you very much, Leanne. I have a question for Professor B. Scherer. I wondered if you could talk to universal claims about our shared humanity and interconnectedness that many Buddhists and well-intentioned people make, myself included, says the questioner. I wondered to what extent such claims have the potential to other certain individuals, groups, and deny, repress difference.
Yes, thank you so much. This is such an important question, and I think it touches on another question in the chat, and that has to do with how, unfortunately, sometimes the dharma can also be used for what we call spiritual bypassing, where we can close our eyes from the concrete experience of suffering, the dukkha dukkata, by claiming some aloof dharmic concept. This obviously is not how I feel the dharma should be used. Our common humanity should not be used in a sense to level over our concrete experiences of in the contrary, what our common humanity should do is to open our hearts to walk in the shoes of the other and to understand the suffering. So well, just looking at this question, so true interconnectedness does not come by leveling and saying it's all the same. And that is then often say, well, it's all the same, don't know mind, meditate more, repent more, just focus on practice and so on. This is not very compassionate. So interconnectedness as part of philosophy is part of what we in Mahayana call wisdom. And wisdom we keep for ourselves. And compassion we use for others. So we use wisdom to create, to move the boat along with everybody. But we are the one, when we use the wisdom. And for others, we all just use open heart, kindness, and compassion. This is the way I connect to interconnectedness and to the usage of the Dharma.
Thank you, Professor B. Scherer. Venerable Miao Guang, would you like to comment on that question as well? I think because based on your presentation, if I can repeat that question to you again, it's about the universal claims about our shared humanity and interconnectedness that many Buddhist and well-intentioned people make, myself included, says the questionnaire. I wondered to what extent such claims have the potential to other certain individuals, groups, and deny, repress difference.
Well, this is a pretty big question, and I won't be speaking, on behalf of the whole world or for all Buddhists in the world as a whole. But if I may use just the example of the Shan community to answer this question. Based on my observation of the development of the Shan community, we've been able to witness the growth of a community across the 5 continents. And in a majority of the time, we've never been able to really see or meet each other in person. But somehow once we meet, it's been quite an interesting experience on how a group of people who have never met in life can suddenly all of a sudden be joined by a shared value that makes them feel as close as ever. I think that's one of the greatest things about the Shan community, that is that shared value of our selfless willingness to contribute to the achievement of human interest together. And by human interest, I think what comes first, of course, is safety of our survival. Secondly, a comfortable life. Thirdly, the open space for us to start to develop mentally, spiritually, and aesthetically. And so on these three levels, when the members of Guang coming from different backgrounds, different languages, connect together, we cannot deny that each and every one of us have a unique characteristic of our own, and somehow we still follow a certain type of belief in ourselves. Mm-hmm. But I feel that the beauty of the humanistic value is that we're able to all kind of come to that same high level and look towards humanity from the perspective of the Bodhisattva. I really appreciate the spirit of the Bodhisattva when they are compared to the role of a mother. Right? I learned this from Dr. Louis Lancaster from the Prajnaparamita Sutra, when they share the experience of enlightenment. Right? What is that experience of enlightenment? I mean, it's something that we all yearn for, we all long for, and we all expect it to be a state of ultimate bliss, joy, and liberation. But to my surprise, in one of my conversations with Dr. Lancaster, he says, well, from the perspective of the Bodhisattva, it's totally not that. In a Bodhisattva's mind, the moment of enlightenment is painful, right? It's very, very exhausting, right? It's full of worries, just like when a mother has just given birth to a child, right? No matter what that child becomes in the future, but this Bodhisattva will be there thinking, I have attained liberation, but what's going to become of my child? I worry for them, right? I'm going to come back for them. I'm going to be there for them, to walk them through the suffering as well. Yeah, but the problem is, what does this child look like? For each Bodhisattva in different regions and countries, the child would all be different. But the value of that Bodhisattva never changes, just like a mother. You will always be my child. So when all the different members of the Guang community come together, somehow the differences of our racial, linguistic, or cultural background becomes dissolved because we're immediately embraced in that spirit of universal compassion and unconditional loving kindness. Right? This may not sound realistic, and feasible at first, but I would say that the joy of this community being able to feel that sense of inclusiveness is exactly this shared value. Right? We come together when we are kind of charged by that spirit, and then when we reach out to each of our individual communities, we don't lose sight of what we want to do. And in most cases, our members and the monastics of Guang is charged by the spirit of willingness to be of service. So I would say, in a very abstract way, the Bodhisattva spirit translated into the word of willingness to be of service. At that moment, you gain a greater ability to become selfless and to look, to embrace the differences, and somehow give yourself also that ability to be among them. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I think that in amazing transformation of the self is allow ourselves through the guidance of the Dharma to let go of our attachment to who we should be, and at the end become anything that is needed of us to become. Yeah, so that inclusiveness becomes so much greater from the perspective of a mother, right? From the perspective of willingness to see others as ourselves. And of course, that takes a lot of practice. So you will see the different events or activities or collective cultivations allows us to build on that strength. And through the past 30 years of efforts, some of these people have become so mature to reach out during COVID-19 in such a selfless way. Yeah, so I'm going to stop here for just for now, but I hope that answers part of the question.
Yes, thank you so much. That's a very comprehensive response. Thank you very much, Venerable Miao. Now, you mentioned about humanity in your response quite a bit. Now, given the theme of the symposium, I would like to draw your attention. Here, I'm talking about all four panelists, about the link between creating an inclusive society and humanistic Buddhism. How are the two related to each other? Like, Perhaps Dr. Linus Lancaster, if you care to go first. Is there a link, and how are the two kind of shaping each other?
We started the Hopeful Monsters project based on an acknowledgement of a terrible deficit of empathy and compassion in our society, and as we worked on it, many things emerged. The sort of the universality of suffering being one of them, and the very encouraging possibility that to those to whom this was a new project gravitated towards it, and very quickly and seemingly easily were able to understand the struggles that other people were going through, even if they didn't share them. But I, as a teacher, don't have any established tradition in my own background really on which to base this on. It was a very improvisational project, and yet Humanistic Buddhism has this long established tradition of understanding the value and importance of compassion. And so as a teacher, I'm not going to get up in front of my classroom and start talking about any one particular religion, which would get me in trouble. But it is one of the things certainly that I draw from in terms of informing my own practice and in navigating some of my interactions with these students that in this case far exceeded any direct training that I've received as a teacher. And so there was certainly the value in that. And although this may seem a little bit tangential, I really appreciated some of what Leanne was saying about the input that they were getting from children, even those of a very young age. And it was very stark for us to see how, I mean, if you actually listen to younger people, they will surprise and amaze you at every turn. And one of the things that I value about some of the Buddhist traditions is this understanding of a kind of an innate universal wisdom that is within people, even if they're not traditionally educated or whatever. And so we were introducing our students to some very complex social ideas and to some psychological ideas about multipliers and feedback loops within bad habits and destructive patterns and so forth. But we found that all we had to do was just introduce it, and then they could take those and run with it as if they already understood these things, but not able to articulate them. And so I think the Buddhist tradition gives us tools to bring to these conversations. And as a teacher, I can do so keeping it behind the scenes, and yet it does inform some of my practice in a way that I think has a tremendous amount of value.
Thank you, Linus. Can I move over to Leanne, please? With the same question from your work at Whitlam Institute, and especially your comment about how your child asked that question about cancer, for example, and COVID, the link between the two. How can we kind of make sense of creating an inclusive society and humanistic Buddhism? You're on mute, Leanne, sorry.
Thanks for including me in this part of the conversation, because I think of everyone on the panel, I'm least qualified to answer this question. But if I may offer an external observation, I happen to be Roman Catholic. I've worked as a human rights officer for a long time, and as a human rights lawyer. And something that I have, in working with different religions and cultures, something that has always struck me as being at the core of human rights practice, if not human rights law, is what I have heard referred to as the golden rule, which I think is found in all of the world's great religions, but particularly also in Buddhism, where I think it's along the lines of treat not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful, or in the Christian tradition, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And for me, that's always been the underpinning of my work in human rights and social justice from my faith-based perspective. And I've seen it through working with people all around the world from different faith traditions. And I wonder what other panelists think about whether that golden rule is reflected in humanistic Buddhism, or if that's a misreading. So I'd love to hear what they think.
Thank you, Leanne. B, do you want to respond to Leanne?
Yes, thank you so much. I deeply appreciate coming from the Roman Catholic tradition, because I draw in my work a lot of inspiration from the Latin American liberation theology. And I think what is important here is this acknowledgement in different religious theologies, or in our terms, Buddhist constructive critical thought, dharmology, to refocus on the human. And this is what Master Taishu did, refocusing on the human, on human life, and this is what Venerable Master Xingyan is doing. And in that way, humanistic Buddhism is simply Buddhism, focusing on humans, focusing on the interconnectedness, focusing on affinities. It's this word that is used in humanistic Buddhism. But this is just, relationships, loving relationships. And so this golden rule is a wonderful start to understand exchanging yourself for the other. In other panel, Dr. Will will talk about this practice in the relationship to autism. Exchanging yourself with the others, putting yourself in other people's shoes, and being kind. A kind society is more than a democratic or a society. It's more than a society where human rights are guaranteed. We want to be more. We want to be a kind society. And I think this is reflected in the activities of Shan and the objectives, be they cultural or educational, be they charitable, or being transformational.
Thank you very much, B. That's terrific. Kind and the parallels or the contrast between a kind society versus a society that is upholding democratic and the human right principles. Yes, that's a terrific comparison and insight. Venerable Miao Wang, please, on the link between, yep.
Okay, since I've started to define an inclusive society with the analogy of the boat, please allow me to continue with this analogy in my attempt to connect it to humanistic Buddhism. We can regard this boat on several levels, right? As a whole, when we look at all of us in this inclusive society and reminding everybody that we are all part of humanity, that brings forth the concept of oneness and coexistence, right? From a very top-down approach. But coming down to reality, you start to see, on this boat, during the everyday lives, people start to have conflicts and difference of interest, right? So this is the moment when we turn to the concept of peace and equality. First of all, how have we really paid attention to the fact that each individual has their own different needs that needs to be satisfied? So to respect that need and acknowledge that need perhaps will open up our mind to a more peaceful solution towards a better way of coexisting without interfering each and everyone else's core values. This is quite important. I think it kind of also brings in Venerable Master's value on interfaith or interdisciplinary dialogue, in the fact that while you are willing to communicate and befriend one another, your core value never change. And so in humanistic Buddhism, I think, again, the core value is really, to really look for the universal achievement of wellness, happiness, and peace for everybody, right, on different levels. But you see at this part, on this boat, there are certain people who prefer to rock the boat, right? While there are some who, try their best to balance the boat. But when actions are put into realization of respect for each other's differences, you're going to see on this boat, the bodhisattvas will start to have a positive influence on those who choose to focus less on others and more on themselves. Well, empathy in this case. So you will see that shared value of selflessness and a realization that by emptiness, it only means that there's never a fixed self-identity. It will continue to change when this boat travels down the river of life. Because at different stages in the rites of passage, we all become different persons. We start to play different roles. Yeah, so being able to play these different roles, will be able to allow us to take turns for certain people to sometimes be the captain, certain people to be at the rear, certain people just to balance the boat. Yeah, so peace and equality hopefully will work at that level. And the third value of humanistic Buddhism that I would like to connect to the boat is respect and tolerance. What happens when there are still people who want to rock the boat, who refuse to work with you, right? But I think by this time, when you have enough people who can balance the boat, right, it's okay. It's okay. Just let them be, right? Let them take it out, right? I think, and at the same time, having that belief in the fact that every human being has ultimately the value of virtue and compassion that will one day shine. I think this is one of the greatest strengths for all of us to give each other space, to believe that one day, you're going to allow that best part in you to shine, and just respect them and support them and let them be. I think on all these three different levels, we see human interest being fulfilled, in very different ways without interfering with each other. So this great magnanimity of respect and tolerance give us a greater sense of expanding that interest net within this boat. Yep. So up to this level, I think some of us are even willing to just be the water that supports the boat, right? Just do our role, however small our role can be, just to make sure that whoever is connected to us can still carry on with their life. I think in the Bodhisattva spirit, that is truly noble. That is truly selfless. So while at the same time, we need to remember empathy and interconnectedness, but humanistic Buddhism, right, allowing us to see that Bodhisattva willingness to help others and support one another is how I would connect the boat to humanistic Buddhism.
Thank you very much. Oh, I like that. There's a whole lot to think about in that response. It's a very deep response. Thank you very much, Venerable Miao Wang. I have another question from the audience. I wonder how many people truly have shared values as the social norm or feel they have to do so to be inclusive or socially acceptable. I'd be interested in your comment. So essentially, the question is about how many people truly have shared values as the social norm or feel that they do so to be inclusive. Anyone want to respond to this? How many? How many? Yeah. So essentially, to have shared values and make that as the social norm, right? I mean, the question is actually focusing on a kind of a quantitative, there's a quantitative aspect to it. How many in a society, how many in a community, how many in a neighborhood would form a social norm? Yes, go ahead.
Maybe I can very concisely I'm uncomfortable with this idea of value and social norms in the sense of, or quantifying it in a sense, because we need to understand the power dynamics behind the production of values. So I rather talk about virtues. And then this is something more aspirational and something we can come together. Values are produced in a society, and societal scripts are produced dependently from collective egotisms of a center that creates margins, right? So I would not put too much interest in social scripts. I would put interest in virtues and how we express virtues in the way we are dealing with each other, with our sameness and our difference.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's spot on. I would like to, because I'm conscious of the time as well, I would like to take, there's an interesting question, I believe, in the chat box. So may I ask the panel if sometimes interconnectedness can be misunderstood as interdependence and hence create the hole in the boat while trying to bridge individuals to the collective? Anyone wants to respond to that? So it's about a misunderstanding of interconnectedness with interdependence.
Well, if I could have a go quickly.
Yep.
I think this depends on whether you take coexistence for granted or whether you take coexistence with gratitude. Both could be the same in one way or the other, but I love the practice of humility and gratitude in Buddhism, because by humility in Buddhism every day, right, we reflect upon what, our shortages in life, our shortcomings in life, while staying willing to change it by repenting our mistakes and then improve our mistakes, never repeat the same mistakes in the future, right? That sense of humility helps us realize how small we are in this world. And therefore, we are in fact dependent on other living beings in order to broaden our own scope of life, right? But that is when we take this interconnectedness with gratitude, because with a sense of gratitude, you remember that others have also contributed to this coexistence. Yep. But on the other hand, when you take interconnectedness for granted, you forget that you also need to play your part. You also need to give your part. Otherwise, the jigsaw puzzle will be incomplete. Yep. So it calls upon us every day to think about the things we are grateful for. For example, every morning I wake up, I say my gratitude to the Buddha, to my Venerable Master for guiding us and giving us this humanistic book, Pure Land. I say my gratitude to my brothers across the world who are keeping this ship rolling, right? They're ready, they're on their position, they're helping, they're serving, they're improving themselves. And I'm also grateful for any human being on this world who may or may not have come across cross paths with me to still make this world what the world is today. Because in many ways, when we see suffering or the downsides of life, we tend to give rise to aversion. But you may not realize that such adversity could become the fertilizer to a much more grateful and more open self, right? Sometimes by going through the suffering, when we are being helped by other people, we are humbled. We remember that people can do things for us. Yep. So in this sense, for those who have not yet come to the senses that we need to take interconnectedness with gratitude, when they are influenced by your selfless actions, right? Again, believing the fact that ultimately humanity, is for goodness, then you are going to influence more people. The world will always be made of half and half. So it doesn't matter which half you are in, right? Always remember, make 1 + 1 greater than 2, right? Be with those who share the same values, join your forces, and try things together again and again and again. And believe in the fact that with the guidance of Dharma, we can become the better half and even influence the other half.
Thank you so much. That's a nice roundup. I mean, you saved me some trouble in making these concluding comments. I mean, that was so good, Venerable Miao Guang. Thank you so much. And I think having a look at the clock, although I have several other questions as well, we need to round up this particular panel. And thank you very much, Professor B. Scherer, Dr. Linus Lancaster, Leanne Smith, and Venerable Miao Guang. Thank you so much for your insight and wisdom, and thank you for your time, and thank you for the audience, everyone who posed questions, and to all the organizers and the tech team. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 8:30 if you're joining us. Thank you.